You know how life feels like it's broken up into these different chapters? You've got your childhood, your crazy teen years, your first real job. Well, it turns out your brain is actually organized in the exact same way.
Yeah, that feeling of moving through different phases, it's not just a feeling, it's literally in your brain. And for the first time, science is mapping out the biological reason for it.
And this is the core idea, put perfectly by one of the study's authors, Duncan Astle. He says, our brains don't just sit there. They're constantly reshaping and rebuilding themselves through these very distinct eras.
And this isn't just some theory. We're talking about a massive study. Researchers analyzed thousands of MRI scans from little babies all the way up to people in their 90s to create the first ever map of how our brain's physical wiring changes from day one.
So what did they find? They mapped out 5 really distinct chapters for our brains. First up, you've got childhood, which goes from birth to about age 9. But check this out. The next chapter, adolescence, they found it lasts all the way to 32. Yeah, you heard that right. Then we hit a really long, stable adulthood that takes us to 66, followed by the last 2 chapters, early and late aging. Let's dig into what's actually happening at each of these stages.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. The first third of our lives is all about incredible construction and refinement in the brain, a process that takes us from birth all the way to age 32.
In that first decade from birth to 9, the brain just explodes with growth. Gray matter, white matter, everything is expanding like crazy. You can picture the wiring like a super dense, overgrown bush. There are tons and tons of connections, but they're not very strong or efficient. Then, right around puberty, something really important starts to happen. The brain begins to prune back all those extra connections to make the important ones a lot stronger.
Here's a great way to think about it. In childhood, your brain is like a city, packed with small, local roads. Sure, there are lots of ways to get around, but none of them are very fast. As we grow, the brain gets rid of those little side streets to build a system of sparse but seriously powerful superhighways. So you end up with fewer connections, but they are way, way more efficient.
And that brings us to the second and honestly most surprising chapter, adolescence. The study shows this phase goes from age 9 all the way up to 32. For that entire period, your brain is still fine-tuning itself. The white matter, that's the insulation on the superhighways, it keeps growing, making communication faster and more efficient year after year.
32. That's the number. That is the number that just totally redefines what we thought we knew about development. It's the age that marks the end of these major adolescent-like changes in our brain structure.
And this is the really big takeaway, right? We've all heard that our brains are pretty much done growing by our mid-20s. But what the lead author Alexa Mousley is saying here is, nope. If you look just at the physical wiring, the neural architecture, that whole maturation process keeps going on until we're around 32. I mean, that's a huge shift in how we think about this stuff.
So, what happens after that big turning point at 32? Well, we enter the third and longest chapter of our brain's life, adulthood.
So, for the next 34 years or so, our brain architecture finally starts to stabilize. The big theme here is specialization. Imagine a startup where everyone does everything, and then it grows into a big company where people become experts in their own departments. That's your brain. Different regions become more walled off and specialized, each getting really good at its specific job. This is a slow, steady process that lasts for more than 3 decades.
Now, to track all this, the researchers used 2 key measurements. First is global efficiency, which is basically how well those neural superhighways connect distant parts of the brain. The other one is modularity, which is kind of the opposite. It measures how specialized and self-contained different brain areas are. During adulthood, what we see is modularity slowly ticking up, meaning our brain starts favoring these super efficient specialized hubs over those long-distance connections.
And that brings us to the final 2 chapters of the brain's life, which kick off around age 66.
So, in Chapter 4, from 66 to 83, the brain starts a gradual reorganization. That incredibly complex network we've spent a lifetime building starts to slowly unwind. Connections become less dense, the networks get sparser, and that global efficiency we talked about, that superhighway system, it starts to slow down a bit.
Then, in the final stage, after age 83, the decline gets a little more distinct. Whole brain connectivity drops off, which forces the brain to adapt. So instead of relying on those long-distance superhighways, the cognitive heavy lifting shifts to more local networks. It's a really fascinating way for the brain to compensate. It's worth pointing out, though, that the researchers did have a smaller group of people in this age range.
So, okay, This is a pretty amazing map of our neural lives, but what does it actually mean for you and me? Why does any of this matter?
Well, knowing which chapter your brain is currently in gives you some really powerful context. It helps explain our strengths and even our vulnerabilities at different ages. For instance, could some learning difficulties in kids be related to problems in that overgrown bush phase? And could this new timeline help us finally understand the network changes that lead to something like dementia? This whole framework just opens up a brand new way of looking at our brain's health across our entire lives.
So I guess the final question is really for you. This research gives all of us a new lens to look at our own development. So, knowing the unique architecture of your brain's current chapter, what are you going to build with it?